Benvenuti di nuovo sul canale di Veggie Channel, io sono Massimo Leopardi. Oggi parliamo di un argomento che tocca sicuramente tutti quanti ed è il nostro smartphone, o meglio il rapporto che abbiamo con il nostro smartphone, o meglio ancora il rapporto che abbiamo con la tecnologia di oggi, che ci porta via tanto di quel tempo, ma che a volte ce lo fa guadagnare e ci fa ottenere dei risultati sempre migliori. Quindi questa lotta tra l'utilizzo in maniera intelligente della tecnologia e lo stare attenti a quello che la tecnologia ci può portare via è un problema che noi vogliamo approfondire. E per questo abbiamo in linea con noi un autore molto importante che si chiama Paul Greenberg. Hi Paul, how are you?
Great. How are you?
And now it's going to be very known in Italy because there's a new book titled Bye Bye Smartphone. So we have the chance to have Paul online from New York. That's right?
Sì,
Okay.
ciao.
First question I wanted to ask you, Paul. You are dealing with matters concerning the environment, the planet, our health. Why decided to write a book on technology, on smartphones?
Very good question. I think for me growing up, and obviously I think we're a similar generation before the smartphone, nature was very, very important to me. I am the child of a divorced mother, and we lived in the countryside, and we always lived on these very large estates in the country where we rented a tiny cottage. And my mother knew that I loved rivers and I loved fishing. And every afternoon after school, I would just completely at random pick a river and wander down it and fish and explore. And this became a very sort of true part of my connection to nature. After I had my son, I say in the book that I think my son was born in 2006 and the smartphone was born in 2007, and they've been fighting for my attention ever since. But I realized my son was not having that experience connecting to nature, that there was always this phone, this screen in between him and nature. I realized that it wasn't just my son, it was children everywhere, and actually adults everywhere, because, adults are always trying to get their children to put their smartphone down, but meanwhile, the adults are on their smartphone all the time. Really, in a way, it's a very logical connection that I should write about this, because if we want to save nature, we want to connect with nature, we need to see nature. We need to see nature with our own eyes and hear it with our own ears and smell it and taste it. So that was, I think, pretty much what led me to it.
You made me think about this very famous image when young kids are going to the Louvre museums. They, instead of watching the paintings, they are sitting on the couch with their cell phones and they are trying to read about the paintings. What do you think
Yes.
about that?
An author here made the very good comment that there are only two industries that refer to their clients as users, and that is the narcotics drug industry and the technology industry. We are users of technology in the sense that we are addicted to it. I don't blame these children. I think that older people, when they see children looking at their phones instead of looking at the paintings, they're quick to blame the children and say, oh, look at these children. They just have no appreciation for art. But what I like to say is that we think that we're just two eyes staring into a smartphone and the smartphone is staring back at us. But in fact, behind that smartphone are 10,000, maybe 100,000 eyes of programmers who have studied the behavior of children and of adults. And they have created an atmosphere that is addictive. And so children will just naturally prefer that because it's a more advanced technology. I mean, certainly the painter of the works in the Louvre were also trying to get your attention, but they're not as developed they're not as adapted to the weaknesses of the contemporary audience. So I think that's my primary take on it. And I guess overall, I would say about technology is that we do have to be careful not to scold people for being addicted to their phones and not to be angry at them, but to understand that they are victims, and they are victims of a very sophisticated industry. So we need to figure out a way to find solidarity amongst all of us to resist this addiction and to create an atmosphere in a world where we can be free of it.
Concerning these big industries that are creating this addiction and they are very well aware of what they're doing, what do you think we can do to push them to correct this tendency?
It's a hard question because it's an inequality issue, right? Because these companies have billions and billions of euros at their disposal. To begin with, so there's the personal and then there is the societal. From the personal point of view, I think we all need to figure out a way to have a portion of our day that is not spent in front of a screen and in front of a smartphone. My personal solution to that is I have a flip phone, and I actually do also have an iPhone, but I don't use the iPhone as a phone. There's actually the most, or let's say the newest edition of the iPhone that allows you to remove the SIM card, I believe is the 13. So what I do is when I leave the house, I take the SIM card out of the iPhone and put it into my flip phone. And I know that then I'm going to have a day in which when I'm out on the street, I'm not looking at a screen. So that's just, we all need to find a personal solution to be separate from screens for part of that day. From a societal point of view, though, I don't think children should be allowed to have smartphones. I mean, it depends on the society. But my son was not allowed to have a smartphone in what we call middle school up until age 14. And I think that, one author here suggested that it should be regulated like cigarettes, that, you certainly don't let a child under 18 smoke, although they figure it out. And I think in general, there's so many ways that the industry tracks us, observes us, monitors us. So anytime there's an impossible legislation that can interfere with the tracking of our lives is important. I know nowadays, now when you go to a website, you see accept cookies, accept necessary cookies and whatever. It seems kind of old now already that we're doing that, but that was an important step. And we have to not be cynical about that and to continue to push back at the industry whenever we can.
As soon as you said we should forbid the use of cell phones to young people, like cigarettes, for example, all of a sudden, what I think is that when you forbid something to somebody, the first thing he wants to do is try to, I suppose you're going even to create even more, how do you say, willing to do that. If all of a sudden you forbid the cell phones, you're going to frustrate a million of young kids. How are you going to cope with this problem?
It's absolutely true. And, it may not be solvable. I mean, this is an interview, right? You're asking me questions and I'm giving you answers, but some of these might not be answerable. But I do think that the home can be a place where you generate positive feelings about life without the smartphone. So at the very least, in my house, there are no smartphones at any mealtime, at any dinner table. And I've been in discussion with the slow food movement about the idea of creating a movement called slow phone, where we need to figure out how to get the phone out of the dining area. Like, my son always says, when food arrives at a restaurant, he wants to take a picture. And he uses this phrase, the camera eats first. And to me, that's just like takes away from the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of smelling, the pleasure of being present. Creating alternative spaces that are friendly and make the phone seem intrusive is probably one way to do it. I mean, I think we all know from our own experiences, you're absolutely right, that laws imposed on us from above always make us want to do the opposite. But culture is another thing altogether. And if we have a culture that embraces eye-to-eye, human-to-human communication, perhaps that's the better way to do it. But, we as parents, again, we can't blame our children for being on their phones. We have to get off our phones ourselves.
This is a good way to think, I suppose. But imagine these advices would be given by a child, 14 years old, 15 years old. Which kind of rules he would imagine to establish in order to put people to live in a normal way, I would say?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you really speak with a teenager, really speak with them. And, I teach university, and I often ask my class, who here is sick of their smartphone and tired of it? 3/4 of the hands go up. So you really, really ask them, they will admit that they too are upset and frustrated by this whole thing. I always remember when this book first came out in America, my son and his friends were all, just so made fun of me a lot. And then they all went to university. And one of my son's friends, Sammy, he went to a university in the deep, deep countryside. And he had trouble making friends. And he was just lying on his bed at night, scrolling. And he texted my son, he said, maybe your dad was right about the smartphone. So I think that in terms of establishing rules, it's useful to have a kind of open conversation with your children. And obviously, an 8-year-old is not going to be able to have this totally open conversation. But once you get to 12, 13, I think you can explain to them, first of all, explain to them what is this industry, and not in a kind of lecturing kind of way, but how are they making money off of you? How are they using you? I think teenagers hate the idea that they're being used somehow by some sort of higher forces. And we actually, I don't know if this is happening in Italy at all, but in the United States, there is a small movement of teenagers. It's been in the New York Times who have intentionally given up their smartphones and are using flip phones instead. So I think you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be just some old person telling a young person this is bad, but let's have an open conversation. I personally, I learn a lot from my son about how the modern internet works, and I'm interested in these kinds of things. So I like to have these dialogues with him. He's still on his smartphone, but to just constantly remind them that they are possibly being used by an industry, I think is a really helpful way to do it.
What are you teaching at the university?
So I teach in a very strange program called Animal Studies. It's a master's program. So I teach one class called Animal Stories, which is about how to tell stories about animals that are scientifically accurate and take into account the inner life of animals. And then also I teach another class called The People versus the Sea, which is all about the ocean and fishing and different issues around ocean conservation. So, yeah.
So going back to your book, edited by Terra Nova, how did you structure your book? What are the main points that we can find in it?
The original plan for the book, when I first conceived of it, was that I wanted it to be 50 things you could do instead of using your iPhone. But when I was sort of developing further on, I worked with different editors and people who gave me advice that really this needs to be a book that you can pick up at any, I have the English edition with me, so I don't have the Italian edition, but it's structured exactly the same way. It's the kind of book that I think you could pick up at any place and find something useful. I don't know if you have this term in Italian, but we call it a bathroom book, that could sit in the bathroom.
Yes, I understand the sense.
But, so just looking at the chapter headings, finding purpose is one chapter, strengthening the mind, strengthening the body, strengthening love, friendship, and family, healing the environment, and then healing your environment. Those are the broad rubrics. Each chapter begins with just a simple lesson. In this case, it's, playing catch with your child versus yelling at him for being on his phone. Requires a certain commitment on the part of the parent. But then throughout, there's a lot of wisdom that is much deeper than my wisdom, which we call reality checks. You can see them, I don't know what they are in Italian, but these little marginalia thing. Everything from Buddhists to philosophers to scientists, there's a little bit about, for example, awe, for example. I don't know what the word is in Italian, but awe, the sense of overwhelming realization of the bigness of the universe. Researchers have found that when you are exposed to a sense of awe, like, for example, looking at the night sky, that there's actual evidence that you are less selfish, that you are more apt to have a sense of peace and calm, things like that. So trying to incorporate some actual scientific evidence into my arguments is sort of what I'm trying to do.
I remember a study I just read recently that is giving evidence that young people that are too much on the phone, which is mostly, I think I would say 90% of the people, find it difficult to have relationships with other people. They find it difficult to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and so they prefer to stay on the phone. And this phenomenon is going so rapidly high that is worrying the governments. We are having less and less kids in the countries. So how would you cope with this problem talking with your kids, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem, and I do address it directly in the book. Those of us who are in romantic relationships or even friend relationships, we understand that our partners are imperfect. Our partners understand that we're imperfect, and our friends as well. But trying to understand that imperfection is not bad. It's actually interesting. What the iPhone and the smartphone represents is, the very smoothness of the glass is this sort of feeling of perfection. And so, of course, when we get adapted to this feeling of constant perfection, we're not prepared to deal with a person who might have all these flaws, but also might have some amazing things right next to those flaws. So the only way I can say is just the phrase I often use is, in spite of what you might think, your phone will never love you back. Again, this is an interview and I'm trying to give you answers, but it's right. It's one of the hugest questions of existence. Does love exist? Can we really find true connection with another person.
Mhm.
And for those of us who have found true connection with another person, I think we know that there's
Mhm.
nothing, I wouldn't say there's not nothing better, but there's nothing like it. The more that we remind our children that there is something very profound about that, the better we can do. Will it work? I don't know. 50 years from now, if they make a statue of me in Piazza Navona saying this man changed the population dynamics of the Republic of Italy, then we'll know it would have worked.
Probably, yes. In any case, it was very helpful, useful to talk with you, to get to know you. I would appreciate to meet again online with you, or even in presence if you want to come and visit our country.
In fact, I will be in Italy in October and doing a few events. I think
Wow.
Terranova has set up something in Firenze and as well as in Milano. And also we'll be speaking at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Bra, the Slow Food Academy as well. So all that will happen in October.
Oh,
And I
that's
think
interesting. Let us know because we might meet again
terrific.
somewhere.
Yes, it would be great to meet you in person, Massimo.
Siamo contenti di aver conosciuto questo autore di Bye Bye Smartphone, edito da Terranova, Paul Greenberg, dà tantissimi spunti per, diciamo, riflettere sulla questione del distacco dalla vita reale creato dagli smartphone, ma anche dai vantaggi della nuova tecnologia. E vi ricordo che potrete approfondire questo argomento nell'articolo del numero di ottobre di Terranova. Quindi grazie Paul per questa intervista e ci
Grazie,
vediamo
grazie.
presto. Alla prossima.
All right, Massimo. Well, very nice to meet you. Maybe I'll see you in Rome.
Grazie, ciao
Grazie,
ciao
ciao,
ciao.
ciao, ciao.